I said only insecure men want monogamy. Now he's sleeping with someone else and I can't even be mad. Okay. So this is absolutely wild, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Like, I literally can't even be mad, because this is technically what I asked for. I'm Alara, 32, and I've spent the last 5 years of my life confidently telling everyone, especially my husband, that monogamy is a relic, a patriarchal cage designed for men too fragile to handle their partner's freedom. And now, well, let's just say the universe decided to call my bluff in the most brutal way possible. It started, as most of my grand theories did, over artisanal cocktails. I was at a friend's rooftop party, the city lights of downtown glittering below like a fallen constellation. I held my glass, a gin and elderflower concoction, and gestured with it for emphasis. It's about evolution, I declared to a small, captive audience of my friends. We've evolved past the need for agrarian-era property rights, so why are we still clinging to them in our relationships? This idea that one person can be your everything, your lover, your best friend, your intellectual equal, your financial partner, it's absurd. It's a setup for failure. My friend Chloe nodded enthusiastically. God, Alara, you and Reese have it so figured out. Mark gets jealous if I even have lunch with a male coworker. I smiled a smug little smile, feeling so enlightened. That's exactly what I mean. It's not about love, it's about control. Only insecure men want monogamy. The words felt so true, so right, as they left my lips. They were the cornerstone of the identity I'd built for myself. Alara, the progressive writer, the woman who understood the complex machinery of human connection in a way others didn't. My husband Reese was standing by the railing, talking to Chloe's husband, Mark. He must have overheard me because he glanced over, and I saw it, the faint, familiar crease that appeared between his eyebrows whenever I launched into one of my manifestos. He didn't say anything, just offered a small, unreadable smile before turning back to his conversation. I had always interpreted that look, that silence, as his slow, steady conversion to my obviously more evolved way of thinking. How could I have been so wrong? I met Reese at a quiet bookstore cafe where I was trying and mostly failing to finish my first novel. He was a financial analyst, a man who dealt in numbers and certainties, the absolute antithesis of my chaotic, artistic world. He came in every morning, ordered a black coffee, and read the Wall Street Journal. He was steady, grounded. He listened when I talked about my characters as if they were real people, and he remembered the tiny details of my day. He was gorgeous in an understated way, tall with kind, hazel eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. But his real appeal was his stillness. He was a rock in the turbulent sea of my creative anxieties. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a small ceremony at his parents' lake house. Even back then, I was vocal about my views. I'd gone through a fierce feminist awakening in college and had devoured books on ethical non-monogamy and relationship anarchy. I truly believed that jealousy was just insecurity in disguise, a social construct we could dismantle if we were simply brave enough. I would tell Reese that real love meant wanting your partner to experience everything life had to offer, with or without you. And he would listen, his head tilted, that little crease forming. That's an interesting perspective, Alara, he'd say. And I, in my infinite wisdom, took his lack of argument as agreement. Our life together was good. Perfect, even. We lived in a charming, slightly too expensive apartment with terrible water pressure. I kept working at the cafe to pay the bills while writing, and he steadily climbed the ladder at his firm. We had our separate friends, our own hobbies. I saw it as the pinnacle of a healthy partnership. Two whole, independent people choosing to share a life, not two halves trying to become one. For years, I truly believed we had cracked the code. But underneath it all, a restlessness was beginning to brew inside me. A quiet, insistent voice whispering that there was more out there, and my perfect, stable life was causing me to miss it. If I had been paying any attention at all, I might have noticed that Reese was perfectly content. He wasn't restless. He was happy, but I was too busy theorizing about relationships to actually see the one I was in. It all started, as these things so often do, with a ghost from the past. I was at a gallery opening for a local artist when I spotted him across the crowded room. Milo. We'd had a few creative writing classes together in college, but hadn't kept in touch. He'd gotten even better looking, with a new confidence that clung to him like expensive cologne. "Alara Vance? No way," he said, his smile immediate and dazzling. He pulled me into a hug that lasted just a second too long. How the hell have you been? Are you still writing that sprawling sci-fi epic? The fact that he remembered my novel knocked me sideways. Reese supported my writing, of course, but he never asked about the specifics of the plot or the nuances of the characters. Milo did. We ended up in a corner, talking for over an hour, the rest of the gallery fading into a dull roar. He was a freelance graphic designer now, working with all these cool indie brands. There was an energy about him, a creative spark that felt intoxicatingly familiar. Nothing happened that night, not even a handhold. But there was an electricity, a palpable what if hanging in the air between us. The texting started the next day. It was casual at first, links to articles about writing, funny memes about caffeine addiction, but it quickly became a daily, then hourly fixture. We started meeting for coffee during my breaks from the cafe. Again, nothing physical happened, but the intellectual and emotional affair was already in full swing. He saw the world through the same artistic, slightly cynical lens that I did. With him, I didn't have to explain my abstract thoughts, he was already there. And that's when the idea, which had been a dormant philosophical concept, began to take root as a tangible, urgent need. Why shouldn't I explore this connection? Monogamy was a social construct, right? I'd been saying it for years. Maybe it was time to practice what I preached. I wasn't falling out of love with Reese, I was simply expanding. Or so I told myself. Bringing it up with Reese was the hard part. I waited for the perfect moment, a sun-drenched Saturday morning when we were both relaxed, coffee in hand, the light streaming through our kitchen window. Babe, I started, trying to sound as casual as possible. I've been thinking about something. I'll grass. Reese lowered his coffee mug, and there it was, that familiar crease between his eyebrows. Oh yeah, what's that? You know my views on relationships, I began, my heart starting to beat a little faster. And how I think monogamy is, well, kind of an outdated concept for our generation. His face changed in a subtle way, a slight tightening around his eyes. What's this about, Alara? Well, I've been reading more about ethical non-monogamy, and it just makes so much sense. People aren't meant to get everything from just one person. It's too much pressure. He set his mug down on the counter with a quiet clink. Are you attracted to someone else? His directness caught me off guard. I waved a dismissive hand. That's not what this is about. It's about freedom, and honesty, and growth. Don't you think there's something beautiful about loving someone enough to let them be completely free? I didn't mention Milo. Not yet. I framed it as a purely intellectual exercise. I thought we were happy, he said, his voice quiet. We are. This isn't about happiness. It's about not limiting each other. I leaned forward, taking his hand. It felt cool in mine. Only insecure men want monogamy, Reese. You're not insecure, are you? That was it. The low blow. I knew it even as the words left my mouth. It was a checkmate. He couldn't disagree without admitting to the very thing I was accusing him of. He pulled his hand away, stood up, and took his mug to the sink. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. I need to think about this, he said. Over the next few weeks, I continued my campaign. I left articles about polyamory on the coffee table. I brought it up casually in conversation. All the while, my clandestine coffee dates with Milo grew longer, our knees brushing under the table, the unspoken tension mounting. Reese grew quieter, more withdrawn. I interpreted his withdrawal as contemplation rather than hurt. I told myself he was processing, evolving. In reality, he was retreating. Finally, after nearly a month of my persistent nudging, he agreed. We were lying in bed, the room dark except for the sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds. Okay, he said, his voice flat, staring at the ceiling. If this is what you want, let's try it. I propped myself up on one elbow, surprised by his sudden capitulation. Really? Yeah, he said, his voice laced with a weariness I chose to ignore. You're right. Maybe I am being insecure. The way he said it made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling away. This was a victory. We'll have boundaries, of course, I rushed to add, wanting to soften the blow. Complete honesty, safe practices. Our relationship always comes first. He just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the ceiling. Whatever you say, Alara. Though, I was too excited to notice the profound resignation in his voice. All I could think about was texting Milo, telling him the door was finally, thrillingly, open. I fell asleep planning our first real date, while next to me, Reese lay awake until dawn. The arrangement began almost immediately. My first official date with Milo was everything I'd imagined. Dinner at a trendy new restaurant, conversation that flowed like wine, and a palpable attraction that made me feel alive for the first time in years. We ended the night with a kiss on my doorstep that left me breathless. I floated into the apartment on a cloud of validation. The apartment was dark, Reese had already gone to bed. In the morning, he didn't ask about my date, and I didn't offer any details. It was the first of many silences that would grow between us, a chasm of unspoken words. Over the next few weeks, I saw Milo regularly. We went from dinner dates to spending entire afternoons together, from kissing to much more. And all the while, Reese became increasingly absent, both physically and emotionally. He started working late, hitting the gym more often. His responses to my questions became brief and non-committal. But I was too caught up in the novelty of Milo to really notice, or perhaps, to care. It wasn't until about a month into this new arrangement that I casually mentioned to him that he too could see other people if he wanted. We were in the kitchen, and I was stirring pasta sauce. I mean, that's the whole point of an open relationship, right? I said cheerfully. You're free too. He looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. Right. Thanks for the reminder. Have you thought about it at all? I asked, suddenly curious. He shrugged. Not really. That. Well, the option's there, I said, turning back to the stove. I didn't mean it. Not really. I liked the idea of Reese waiting faithfully at home while I explored. The power dynamic felt good. Me, the evolved one, him, the steady anchor. I never seriously considered he might take me up on my offer. That evening, I noticed him texting more than usual, a small, private smile playing at the corner of his mouth. A tiny seed of unease planted itself in my stomach, but I dismissed it. Reese wasn't the type. He was too traditional, too steady. Wasn't he? As the weeks turned into months, something shifted. The initial dizzying excitement with Milo began to fade. The deep conversations started to feel repetitive. The thrill of the new was wearing off, leaving behind something pleasant but ultimately lacking. Meanwhile, Reese had changed in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. He seemed more self-contained. He no longer asked me about my day or seemed interested in my latest writing progress. When I came home from dates with Milo, he didn't show any subtle signs of jealousy. No questions, no prying, nothing. Just a polite nod and a good night before he returned to whatever he was doing. At the same time, I noticed other changes. New clothes appeared in his closet, tailored shirts and stylish jeans I'd never seen before. He was wearing a different cologne, something woody and sophisticated. He'd always been fit, but now his shoulders seemed broader, his jawline more defined. His phone, once an object of utility, had become a constant companion, often chiming with texts that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It wasn't until I was paying our cell phone bill online one evening that I noticed something odd. There was a number, ending in 5812, that appeared dozens of times in Reese's call and text logs, far more frequently than any other contact. A number I didn't recognize. The next morning, over breakfast, I mentioned it as casually as I could. Hey, I was paying the phone bill yesterday and noticed you've been texting someone a lot, number ending in 5812. Reese glanced up from his toast, his expression neutral. Oh, that's Lena. She's helping me with the Henderson account at work. Seems like a lot of texts for work, I said, trying to keep my tone light. He shrugged. She's thorough. We've been putting in extra hours on this one. Something in his tone, the way he said her name Lena, with a casual familiarity, made my stomach tighten. But what could I say? I was literally spending multiple evenings a week with another man. I had no ground to stand on. But I wasn't just curious now. I was uneasy. That unease grew as I began paying more attention. The late nights, at work. The weekends when he'd be gone for hours, supposedly at the gym or running errands, but returning with no obvious purchases. The way he no longer reached for me in bed, not even unconsciously in his sleep. I found myself thinking about Reese more and more during my dates with Milo, wondering what he was doing, who he was with. I suggested a weekend getaway, thinking some alone time might help us reconnect. I can't that weekend, he said, not even looking up from his phone. I've got plans. Action? What plans? I asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. Just plans, Alara, things I need to take care of. It was the vagueness, the finality in his tone, that finally pushed me over the edge. After 3 months of our open relationship, I realized I had no idea what my husband actually did with his time anymore. We were living like polite roommates, sharing a space but not our lives, and it was eating me alive. I decided to surprise him at work for lunch. I told myself it was a nice gesture, a way to reconnect. But deep down, I knew I was looking for something. I picked up sandwiches from his favorite deli and headed downtown to his sleek office building. As I approached the glass and steel entrance, I saw him coming out. He was with a woman. She was stunning in that effortless way, tall and willowy, with honey blonde hair and a laugh that seemed to carry across the plaza. But what knocked the wind out of me wasn't her appearance. It was the way Reese was looking at her. He was looking at her with a warmth and focused attention and something like adoration. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me. I stood frozen on the pavement as they walked together to a nearby restaurant, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. Through the large window, I watched them sit at a table. I saw them lean toward each other, their hands intertwined on the tabletop. And then, as casual as breathing, she leaned forward and kissed him, a quick, familiar gesture that spoke of an established, comfortable intimacy. My vision blurred. The bag of sandwiches suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I turned and walked back to my car in a daze, drove home on autopilot, and sat on our couch, staring at nothing until I heard his key in the lock hours later. "Hey," he said, surprised to see me home so early. "Everything okay?" "Who is Lena?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He paused, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "I told you, she's a coworker." "Is that all she is?" A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed and sat down in the armchair across from me. "No," he said simply. "That's not all she island." "How long?" I asked, my throat tight. "A few months. Since about a week after you started seeing Milo." "Dre." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You've been seeing her this whole time? And you never told me?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in an eternity. His gaze was not angry, but weary. "You wanted an open relationship," he said, his voice even. "You said we needed to be free. You said only insecure men want monogamy. What was I supposed to do with that, Alara?" "I don't know. Maybe talk to me. Tell me you were actually acting on it." "They." "Why?" he countered. "You never gave me details about Milo. We agreed on honesty, but we never practiced it, did we? We just practiced silence." "That's different," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow and hypocritical they sounded. "How?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "How is it different?" I had no answer. The devastating truth was, I had wanted the freedom without the consequences. I had wanted Reese to remain faithfully mine, a safe harbor to return to while I sailed on other seas. I had never genuinely considered what it would mean for him to do the same. "Are you in love with her?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Reese looked down at his hands, then back at me. His hazel eyes were filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "I don't know if it's love yet," he said quietly. "But she makes me feel valued. Wanted. She doesn't make me feel insecure for wanting a committed relationship." Each word was a knife. Not because he was being cruel, Reese wasn't a cruel man, but because he was being honest. I had made him feel insecure. I had belittled his desire for monogamy as old-fashioned and regressive, and now, someone else was affirming the very things I had dismissed. "So, what happens now?" I asked, tears finally spilling over, hot and shameful, down my cheeks. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't keep living like this, Alara. Pretending I'm okay with an arrangement I never really wanted." In the weeks that followed, we tried. We really did. I ended things with Milo in a stilted, awkward phone call. Reese promised to be more open about his feelings. We went to therapy, both together and separately. The therapist's office became a sterile battleground where we dissected our broken communication and my intellectual arrogance. But the distance remained. A ghost haunted our apartment, the ghost of Lena. Reese continued seeing her, though now with my full, painful knowledge. He would come home from dates with her with a lightness in his step I couldn't remember seeing in years. He wasn't rubbing it in my face, he was genuinely happier, and that somehow made it worse. Meanwhile, I found myself alone with my thoughts, confronting the uncomfortable truth about who I was and what I really wanted. My progressive theories had crumbled, leaving behind the raw, primitive emotions I had so long disdained: jealousy, possessiveness, fear. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, nearly 6 months after our relationship had first opened. Reese sat me down at our kitchen table, his expression serious but calm. Alara, I need to tell you something, he began. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've realized something important. I want monogamy. I've always wanted it. Not because I'm insecure, but because that's how I'm built. That's what makes me feel safe and connected. I nodded, tears already threatening. And Lena wants that too? Yes, he said quietly. She does. And I'm the one who doesn't. I finished, the bitter irony not lost on me. He reached across the table and took my hand. I think maybe you do want it, Alara. But you've spent so long convincing yourself otherwise that you can't admit it. I pulled my hand away, a sudden sharp anger flaring up. Don't tell me what I want. Okay, he said, leaning back. Then tell me, what do you want? The question hung between us, deceptively simple yet impossible to answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I had spent years building this identity, as the evolved partner who was beyond jealousy. But when faced with the reality of Reese connecting deeply with someone else, all my enlightened theories had turned to ash. I want things to go back to how they were, I finally whispered, my voice small and broken. Reese's expression was gentle but resolute. We can't go back, Alara. Too much has changed. I've changed. A week later, he packed a suitcase. He was moving in with Lena, at least temporarily. He needed space, he said. We both knew it was more than that. He was testing the waters of a relationship built on shared values rather than theoretical ideals. As I watched him pack a bag with his shirts and books, a bitter realization settled over me. I couldn't even be mad at him. Not really. This was exactly what I had advocated for. Freedom to follow your heart, to pursue connections without the constraints of traditional monogamy. Reese was simply taking the philosophy I'd preached and living it to its logical conclusion. He paused at the door, suitcase in hand. I do love you, Alara. I always will, but love isn't enough if we want fundamentally different things. Do we? I asked, desperately clinging to the possibility that this was all a misunderstanding. Want different things? He gave me a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. I think we might have wanted the same thing all along, he said. We just couldn't admit it, to ourselves or to each other. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment, my apartment, now, I supposed. The silence was deafening. How had my confident theories led me here, alone and heartbroken? For all my talk about freedom from jealousy, I was just as possessive as anyone else. I had wanted to keep Reese safely wrapped up in our marriage while I experienced the thrill of something new. When he had done the exact same thing, it had broken me. He had simply taken me at my word, followed the path I insisted was enlightened. And in doing so, he'd found someone who valued what he had to offer. His loyalty, his desire for monogamy, his steady traditional heart. I opened my laptop, not to work on my novel, but to start something new. A different story, the story of us. Of how I'd been so focused on what I thought I should want that I destroyed what I actually had. I'd said only insecure men want monogamy. Turns out, what I really meant was that only an insecure woman needs to test her partner's love by seeing how much freedom he'll tolerate. And in the process of discovering that ugly truth, I'd lost the one person who had loved me enough to let me learn it my way, even when it meant losing me completely.